Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Wednesday with Wing in September. We will wait a little minute because people are still joining the meeting. But whilst we do that, I'm going to give a quick introduction to Harriet. So we are thrilled to have you to join us today for today's session. And we're going to be diving into the fascinating intersection of data science and geothermal innovation in Cornwall. So our speaker is Harriet Dawson from Cornish Lithium. And Harriet brings a fresh perspective on how computational geoscience is helping to unlock the potential of critical mineral extraction from geothermal waters in Cornwall. So throughout the talk, please write any questions you may have in the Q&A box so that we can address them once the talk is finished. And when the talk is finished, please, if you feel you want to, please pop on your cameras so that we can make it a more interactive Q&A session. So without further ado, I would like to ask Harriet to start her talk. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Lucy. Yes, so as Lucy said, I'm Harriet. I'm the data scientist at Cornish Lithium. You might notice I say the data scientist. There is only one of me, which means that I get to work on a lot of cool different projects across the business. But I am based in the lithium and geothermal waters team, which is why I'm here speaking to you all today. So I wanted to start my talk today with a question for you all. How can old mine plans help us to support the energy transition? At first, that might sound a bit weird or surprising. When we think about powering the future, we might picture wind turbines, solar panels, electric cars, not hand-drawn maps from the 1800s. But those maps, sketches, and records hold a wealth of knowledge. They capture centuries of exploration, of tunnels driven, of rocks mapped, details that might be impossible to recover today. Now, imagine pairing those with modern tools, georeferencing, 3D modeling, machine learning. By breathing digital life into historical data, we can reveal patterns and insights that are crucial for understanding Cornwall's geothermal resources. Because the energy transition isn't just about new technologies, it's about how we use all the knowledge available to us. And the past has more to teach us than we might think. So today we're going to explore how data science and history can come together, how old mine plans can be transformed into modern geological models, and how that journey helps us build the foundations for a greener future. Before we get stuck into it, I'll give you a brief overview of what I'm going to be talking about this afternoon. So first, I'll talk about the role of mining in a green transition, and I'll argue for its vital place in a low-carbon future. I'll then run through some bits on lithium and its common geological sources, as I appreciate not everyone may be familiar with that. Then I'll talk a little bit about our current projects, including the significant amount of work we're doing to develop and maintain our green credentials. After that, I'll take you through what 21st century exploration looks like, how we bring together historic mine plans, georeferencing, geological modelling, and a whole range of modern datasets. And finally, I'll show you how data science underpins this work at Cornish Lithium, including how we use machine learning to turn raw data into real insights. So I'll skip over this disclaimer. I swear it gets longer every time we give a talk, but it's essentially saying that by giving this talk, I am not trying to sell you shares. If you do want to read through it all, it will be in the recording, so hit pause now and read away to your heart's desire. So let's get started with mining and the energy transition. And I'm going to start off with something hopefully familiar. At this point, it's very hard to deny that humans are having an unprecedented impact on the climate of our planet. This is driven by greenhouse gas emissions, which are largely due to the burning of fossil fuels. If we don't make significant changes and drive to reduce CO2 emissions as quickly as possible, we will continue to warm the planet and cause irreversible environmental and ecological damage. And I'm hoping that's not news to anyone watching here. To avoid this requires a revolution in how we produce and use energy. Low carbon technologies are essential for this transition, and we've already made enormous steps in the development of these, and they are constantly improving. But there's a catch. The infrastructure that's necessary requires huge amounts of metals, minerals, and materials. There's a saying that you might have heard of, which is popular in the mining industry, which is, if you can't grow it, you have to mine it. And I think this serves well as a reminder that electric vehicles, transitional energy, and a green economy start with metals. There aren't many plant-based wind turbines around, so to implement these earth-saving technologies, we're going to need to mine more. So let's start with wind. For a 3 megawatt turbine, there are over 1,000 tonnes of concrete needed, along with hundreds of tonnes of metals. This year, we're expected to have 300-metre tall turbines producing something like 13 to 15 megawatts, which is enough to power a small town. Hopefully, this puts that into context. So I've shrunk down the 3 megawatt turbine from the last slide down to be approximately to scale, and I've added in some London landmarks to help you picture just how big these are. With wind turbines set to get much bigger, they're only going to require more materials. And what about solar? Well, solar panels too rely on mined materials, and crucially, a number of different materials to those that are found in wind turbines. I think also a potentially slightly interesting thing to note here is the 10% polymer content, which shows that we still are and likely will continue to be reliant on plastics derived from fossil fuels for our energy technologies. And then, of course, there are the batteries. I won't go into the specifics just yet, but the key point, as with wind and solar, is that they require mined materials. And importantly for us at Cornish Lithium, they require lithium, as well as some other less common metals to function effectively and efficiently. These batteries are important for energy storage, but I'm sure you're all aware of the most significant use of lithium-ion batteries that's on the horizon is in electric vehicles. With the transition away from petrol and diesel-powered cars, EVs are in first place to take over. To give a sense of scale, currently 90 million cars are made globally, 18 million in the EU, and around 1 million in the UK. Come 2035, these will need to be electric. That means a lot of batteries, which means a lot of lithium. So just before we move on from batteries, I'll take a quick moment to address the positively charged elephant in the room. There are quite reasonably commonly asked questions about why we talk so much about lithium when there are other elements around that can be used as the positively charged ions in a battery. The most commonly talked about are the monovalent ions, so things like sodium ion and potassium ion, or multivalent, so things like magnesium ion and aluminium ion. Essentially, it all comes down to efficiency. Of the commonly occurring and stable positively charged ions, you just can't beat lithium for charge density. Some of you might be sat there thinking, what about beryllium? So while it has got good charge density, it's super toxic and expensive, so it's really a no-go on that front. That's not to say batteries using these other ions aren't possible or won't have any uses. They invariably will. But for the majority of uses of batteries at the moment, in electric vehicles and in mobile devices, things like weight and charge density and volumetric density are really important. On top of that, lithium-ion technology is very well advanced currently compared to sodium-ion and the others. Also, there's ongoing research into these other technologies. But in short, the answer is that lithium-ion tech is more advanced and lithium is inherently the best available ion. So if we can keep supply up with demand, there are a few reasons to not to choose lithium. So back on track, the materials that we use in our everyday lives are changing. As technology improves, we'll need more and more diverse materials to go into it. I know this mentions energy pathways, but if you think about a mobile phone, that's got around 70 different elements in it. If you bear in mind that there are only 83 stable and non-radioactive elements to start with, we're using a pretty sizable chunk of the available periodic table. That's all to say that with diversity of materials, we'll need to come diversity of mining, and as I've been trying to illustrate, that means more mining. A related way of looking at it is to think about critical raw materials. So the elements highlighted here in different colours are those that have been chosen by the EU as being critical to future and current technologies, while having impending or current security of supply issues. Oops. There you go. So the ones that now have the slightly shoddy looking black stars next to them are the ones that have been designated critical raw materials by the BGS. And actually the US has a very similar list encompassing many of the same elements. Okay, so what about lithium? As you can see on the right of the slide, global lithium demand is forecast to significantly increase over the next 15 years, growing from 1.3 million tonnes of lithium carbon equivalent this year to between 3.6 and 5.2 million tonnes by 2040. From 2030, the UK's lithium demand could account for 15% of current global supply under the falling short scenario and up to 40% under the net zero scenario. And this demand will largely be driven by the automotive sector. As you can see by the numbers on the slide, the industry makes up a pretty sizable chunk of the UK economy. And of course, given the imminent transition to electric vehicles that we've been talking about, it's a significant issue for the industry that the UK currently has no domestic supply of lithium. However, this presents us with a valuable opportunity to develop a supply chain of key battery materials in the UK. As mentioned here as well, a result of Brexit is that we need to adhere to certain rules of origin as part of our trading agreement with the EU. I won't go into detail on this, but essentially this prioritises British or European lithium for electric vehicles that are due to be sold in the European market. And given that half of the UK's current vehicle exports go to the EU, that's a large incentive to develop homegrown lithium supplies. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit more about lithium. In short, if you look hard enough, you can find lithium all over the place. For example, lithium is present in seawater at a concentration of about 180 parts per billion. What's significantly harder to find, however, are economically viable deposits of lithium. As I'll come on to in the next few slides, there are pretty significant environmental and social governance issues associated with typical extraction techniques, and these challenges will only increase with demand. Mineral extraction is a long-term game. It typically takes at least 10 years for a deposit to go from being discovered to being mined, and that's if it can prove itself viable. And finally, extracting lithium of battery grade is made harder due to various chemical factors that are difficult to mitigate. In terms of how we find lithium, these are the three most commonly exploited forms. On the left, we have the brines where lithium salts are dissolved in water. This can be geothermal, as is the case in Cornwall, or things like continental salar brines in South America, or oil-filled brines, which are currently being looked at in the US. Next, we have the more conventional hard rock ore minerals. So lepidolite is a lithium-rich mica and also a major source of rubidium. And spodumene is the main ore mineral that's mined around the world, particularly in Australia. In Cornwall, we typically find lithium in enriched micas, either lepidolite or polylithiumite. So what about where we find lithium today? Well, most of it's either mined from hard rock spodumene deposits in Australia or from the so-called salar brines in South America. As I mentioned before, these each have their own ESG problems. The spodumene deposits in Australia are generally concentrated on site before being shipped as an ore concentrate to China, where the lithium is then extracted with pyrometallurgical processes. That's to say the ore is roasted at over 1,000 degrees in a country whose energy grid is supplied in a large part by coal-fired power stations. Obviously, this uses a huge amount of pretty dirty energy to get the lithium out as an end product. In South America, they essentially drill down into the salt flats in the Atacama Desert and pump water down to dissolve the salts. This brine is then pumped back up to the surface and left to evaporate in massive kilometre-scale ponds for around 18 months, and then they'll precipitate a fairly impure lithium-rich salts. So once it's been taken out of the ground, the lithium then goes on a pretty mega journey around the world. Often the lithium ions in the batteries of an electric vehicle parts on a driveway in the UK have travelled somewhere over 50,000 kilometres to get there. Obviously, this also adds to the carbon cost of the vehicle, and that's not to mention the geopolitical risk and fragility of international and intercontinental supply routes. This has been brought to the fore in the last couple of years with things like the Ever Given getting stuck in the Suez Canal, the war in Ukraine, the pandemic, among other things, all of which have demonstrated the fragility of the systems. Wouldn't it be much better to have a more compressed supply chain that might look something like this? So in this scenario, the lithium is mined and concentrated in Cornwall. It would then be shipped to somewhere like the new Argatras gigafactory in Somerset to be made into a battery. These batteries can then go down the road to one of the UK's car manufacturers like Jaguar Land Rover, who put it into a vehicle and ship it around the UK, resulting in a supply chain of just over 900 kilometres, which is around 1.8% of the current supply chain that we use. Obviously, we need someone to extract the lithium from Cornwall, which is where we come in. So our company is focused on two separate projects at the moment, the Trelava Lithium project and Lithium in Geothermal Waters projects. Trelava is a hard rock project which repurposes an abandoned China clay pit, and as well as some of the nearby infrastructure, with the hopes of building a low carbon mine and processing plant. Whereas the Geothermal Waters project is drilling deep boreholes around 1 to 2 kilometres deep, targeting fault zones around the Cornish granites. So why Cornwall? Well, as with a lot of the interesting geology in Cornwall, it's all due to the granites. There are lithium enriched granites that run from the Scilly Isles all the way up to Dartmoor. This means that Cornwall has one of the largest lithium deposits in Europe. There is also significant potential for base metals such as tin and copper, with over 3,000 recorded mines known to exist in Cornwall. And again, the granite has played a major role in the formation of these deposits. While there has been huge historic mining in Cornwall, there is still plenty of metal left in the ground. On the whole, Cornish mines closed due to the collapses in the tin or copper price rather than by running out of metal. The granites are also hot due to radioactive decay that occurs within them, which causes Cornwall to have some of the highest heat gradients in the UK. For those that don't know, this means in essence that the rocks get hotter quicker, meaning that we don't need to drill down as far to get hot water. In terms of infrastructure, Cornwall has lots of wind and solar generation capacity already, with plans for more to be added in the Celtic Sea in the next few years. By way of transport links, there's a main railway line that connects the county with the rest of the UK, as well as established commercial ports such as Falmouth and Foy. On top of this, while the UK economy by the coast is dominated by the tourist trade, this doesn't particularly continue when you head inland. So following the collapse of the mining industry in the 80s, these areas have been largely left behind. One of the results of this is that there's a large amount of industrial real estate that's relatively underused running down the spine of the country. Then finally, there are the people. Mining has been happening in Cornwall for around 6,000 years, and there's a real affinity for a lot of Cornish people for mining. Typically, Cornwall's industry is revolved around three key things: fishing, farming, and mining. And a lot of people still retain mining as a key part of their heritage and their cultural identity. As I said slightly earlier, the last mining boom in Cornwall lasted until the early 80s, so mining is still within the living memory for a lot of Cornish people. There's also demand for year-round jobs. As I mentioned, tourism dominates the economy of Cornwall at the moment, which obviously dies off outside the summer season. And unsurprisingly, that's not great. And then some of the globally recognised mining and mineral processing consultancies still have a presence in Cornwall, which is a direct result of the prosperity of Cornish mining in the 20th century. So back to our projects. Firstly, there's the Trelava Lithium project. Geologically, it's a hard rock lithium mine in a kaolinized G5 granite. Basically, that means it's a granite that contains lithium-rich minerals with clay on top of it. As I mentioned, this is located in an old China clay pit, meaning that we don't have to dig up any pristine Cornish landscape to open our mine, which is obviously not something we would want to do and would be a significantly harder sell from an ESG point of view. It's been designated a nationally significant infrastructure project, and we've got an exclusive license over the St Austell area for the Lepidico hydrometallurgical lithium processing technologies. That is a mouthful. So this means that in contrast to hard rock lithium mines elsewhere, we don't have to spend huge amounts of energy roasting the ore, and instead we can use relatively low temperature chemical process to extract the lithium. The other side of the business, and the one that I'm assuming everyone listening is most excited about, is the geothermal side. As a rough overview, instead of just targeting the granites themselves for lithium, we're also targeting geothermal fluids which have circulated through the granites and have become enriched in lithium. To be able to extract meaningful quantities of these fluids for processing, we're targeting the pre-existing plumbing system in the form of faults and fracture zones that traverse Cornwall. These are permeable structures that allow us to extract more water and therefore recover more lithium. We've completed a number of boreholes to between 1 to 2 kilometres deep, and these holes generate 3 products: lithium, heat, and water. Obviously, the lithium is our main focus, but we are looking to partner with local businesses to supply them with the heat to allow them to reduce their reliance on fossil fuels. For example, we could partner with a local creamery to supply geothermal heat to them for their pasteurisation processes. You might be aware that Cornwall is pretty well known for our cream teas. Don't worry, I'm not going to go into that debate, although I am Cornish, so jam first always. But a big part of the cream tea is the clotted cream. I don't know if any of you have tried making your own clotted cream, but you basically put heavy cream in a pan and bake it for 24 hours. I mean, if you're planning on doing it yourself, I'd suggest consulting an actual recipe, but that's essentially how it's made. Obviously, this process requires quite a bit of heat, so if we can supply a local Cornish creamery with heat while keeping lithium for ourselves, we're both winning. On the water side, climate change is meaning that we need to rethink our perhaps slightly relaxed approach to water use in the UK and here in the southwest. As a result, we're looking into whether we can treat our geothermal waters post-DLE and heat extraction so that it can be used either for industrial processes or if we can treat it enough to make it possible and fit for human consumption. So how do we go about conducting our exploration? How do we go from this to this? Well, it all starts with the archive. So there's a famous theory in geology called uniformitarianism, which can be summarized by the phrase, the present is the key to the past. Essentially, this is saying that the processes occurring today are the same as those that have operated in the past and that will operate in the future. And just as the principle of uniformitarianism helps geologists to understand ancient processes through present-day observations, for us, historical data provides a bridge to understanding future resource potential. So I've rephrased this to say the past is the key to the future. 6,000 years of mining has resulted in the creation of quite a lot of recorded material. Some of this is unhelpful, but a large number of the records created in the last 200 years or so are high quality engineering plans and geological observations, and we can use those to inform our exploration today. So things like historical mine plans and records can provide us with insights into features and structures that may no longer be visible or accessible today. By digitizing and analyzing these historical datasets, they become the foundation for building our modern 3D geological models. These 3D models inform targeted exploration efforts, optimizing the search for lithium, which, as we now know, is a critical mineral for the green energy transition. Leveraging this past knowledge with cutting-edge data science tools ensures efficient and responsible resource discovery, which aligns with global sustainability goals. So the first stage in our exploration is to trawl through the archive materials that we've accumulated over the past 8 years and pick out useful documents. To backtrack a little bit to these images we saw a few slides ago, this plan on the right is a really good example of how the company can use the archive. You might see in the bottom corner, it mentions hot water rich in lithia. So this plan dates from, I think, 1870, and around the same time in the mid-1860s, we have records of a professor talking about the same mine, saying they found concentrations of lithium chloride in a hot spring, and basically saying, if only we had a use for lithium. Well, now we do. Okay, so back on to how we process this archive material. The first step is to digitize the historical materials, such as our mine plans, turning physical or scanned documents into digital formats. These digital plans are then georeferenced using tools like ArcGIS or QGIS, aligning them with real-world coordinates to place them accurately on modern maps. Georeferencing ensures the data fits into a spatial framework, which is really important for analysis and integration further downstream. Once georeferenced, these plans are then carefully marked up to identify and highlight key geological features such as faults, veins, and lodes. This step might involve digitising annotations, symbols, and other relevant information to ensure that all the valuable data is captured. The marked up plans are then imported into 3D geological modelling software like Leapfrog. So this software integrates the historical data with our modern geological observations to create detailed 3D representations of the subsurface. Then by peeling away the layers of historical plans, what remains is a 3D model of the geology of the area. These models provide a clear and accurate picture of subsurface structures, helping us to guide exploration and inform decision-making. So that sums up the main pipeline of transforming historical records into 3D geological models. But I'll just quickly touch on some of the other data sources that also play a crucial role in enhancing our understanding of the geology. Naturally, I'm starting with core data because that's what my PhD was in, but core and borehole data are also fundamental. They give us direct evidence of the rocks at depth. By logging, sampling, and analysing cores, we can ground truth our models and link surface observations with what lies beneath. Borehole geophysics provides a further layer of detail, so that helps us to characterise structures, rock properties, fluid pathways that we can't see from the surface alone. We also use drone-flown aerial surveys. So a lot of the exposed bedrock in Cornwall is found around the coastline. So to avoid us having to get our abseiling kit out whenever we want to go down and study structures in a cliff face, we can take these aerial surveys and combine them into a digital elevation model to help us do remote fieldwork. These DEMs also enable us to perform VR-based analysis to measure fracture orientations and structural features. And this can then feed into static discrete fracture network models to better characterise fracture systems and their connectivity. Geochemistry is also a very important data source. So this includes water geochemistry from our own drill holes and any additional data sets we can access. So that could be things like regional stream sediment and soil geochemical surveys, which provide broader scale insights. But we do also get out and do our own more targeted surveys to allow us to home in on specific areas of interest. And finally, when the weather's nice, which it is not today, but we do still head out into the field for some direct observations. This might involve studying outcrops, collecting samples, and of course the classic geological practice of rock licking to better understand the material firsthand. Cool. So now I'll talk in a bit more detail about the role of data science in our modelling pipeline. So like I said, it all starts with the archive collection. Cornish Lithium have been conducting a process of digital capture of historic records since 2017. The company holds extensive records of previous mine workings, ownerships, and descriptions of historical mining activities. Not only do we deal with historic data, which we refer to as our archive documents, but we also have more modern assets known as data collections. The difference being archive documents have gone through our archive team and data collections were digitised by someone else. Our archive database currently contains over 115,000 individual sources, indexed in approximately 23,000 catalogue records. So here's a little sample of some of our archive documents. When our archive team scan in a document, they'll add information to a database, which contains things like the title, description of the document, dated year, and some metadata, which serve as tags to sort of help narrow down later searching for keywords. Archive documents include a wide variety of information, so things like text, handwriting, tables, diagrams, cross-sections, mine plans, maps. Not all of these elements can be georeferenced, so text and tables are useful, but they don't really correspond to physical locations. But cross-sections, mines, mine plans, and maps, they can be georeferenced, and that makes them essential for GIS workflows and geological modelling. With over 100,000 items in the archive, manually identifying and categorising these data types would be incredibly time-consuming and labour-intensive. So that's where I come in. And we can use machine learning to speed up this process. So object detection is a type of deep learning algorithm that identifies and locates specific objects within an image, such as distinguishing diagrams from text or maps. It enables automation of this categorization, which significantly speeds up the process. You might be familiar with this in everyday life too. It's the same kind of technology that's used in things like self-driving cars to detect pedestrians, traffic lights, and road signs. And just as object detection helps cars make sense of busy streets, it helps us make sense of busy archives. So we can automatically pick out the maps, tables, and diagrams hidden within thousands of historical documents. So object detection is really just a way of teaching a computer to look at a picture and point out what's in it. So if you imagine showing a computer a photo, it doesn't just say, there's a dog. It also draws a box around where the dog is. And that's the difference between object detection and just image recognition. So there are two main ways that we can do this. Two-stage detectors work a bit like how we humans scan a photo. So first we look for the parts of the image that might have something interesting, say a cluster of shapes that could be an animal. Then in the second step, we check those areas carefully and decide what each object is. They are very accurate, but they are a bit slower. One-stage detectors skip that first step. So instead of asking, where should I look, and then what is it, they try to answer both questions at once across the whole image. That means they are usually faster, but they can be sometimes slightly less precise. So in short, two-stage detectors is like a careful double check, and one stage is kind of like a quick scan. For this process, we used a one-stage detector called YOLO, which stands for You Only Look Once. The idea is that instead of scanning the image in parts, the model looks at the whole picture in a single pass and works out what's there and where it is. That makes it very fast, which is perfect when you need to process thousands of very large images like we do with historical maps. So let's talk about georeferencing. In simple terms, when we georeference, say, an old mine plan, we need to align it to a modern map. So features that were drawn centuries ago line up with real-world coordinates. To do this, we need identifiable features that exist both on the mine plan and on our reference maps. So that could be things like mine shafts, like we've got here, or engine houses, or other landmarks. But obviously there is a challenge. Cornwall's landscape has changed quite a lot in the last 200 years. Buildings have disappeared, other ones have reappeared, fields have redeveloped, roads are built, some features simply no longer exist. So instead of trying to match directly to today's maps, we use old Ordnance Survey maps that are drawn closer in time to when the mine plans were produced. These map files are huge. They can sometimes take 5 minutes, quite often longer, just to load each section into QGIS or ArcGIS. And even once they're loaded, searching for points in common can be slow and painstaking. And that's where I come in again. So we trained a YOLO model to automatically identify different map symbols on the old OS sheets. In the example on the right, which is one of the 1908 maps, you can see, well, hopefully, I'm not sure if it's, they might be a bit small, but you can hopefully see it picking out words like shaft, mine, and BS, which stands for boundary stone, no other definition. And this process also worked in 2 steps. So first, YOLO was passed over the maps to detect all instances of the text that we were interested in, and then drew bounding boxes and assigned confidence scores. Anything that was below a confidence score of 0.5 or 50% sure that that's what it is, was then filtered out to avoid false positives. And you might notice that some of these words have associated marker points. So using the text detections from the first step, we zoomed in on regions of interest around each word and trained another YOLO model again, but this time to find the small marker points that show the exact location. Finally, we linked each word with its marker and exported the coordinates as a shapefile into ArcGIS. This gave us a preset set of reference points that we could use for georeferencing, And it turned out what was once hours of manual searching into an automated, scalable process. So when you pop all of those onto a map of Cornwall, it looks something jazzy like that. So the map can scan massive historical maps and spot thousands of symbols in minutes, something that would take months, maybe longer, manually. So our model has managed to identify over 32,000 symbols, and these have been mapped across 24 different symbologies. This is important because it speeds up georeferencing by removing the need to search for points manually. It also increases the accuracy when working with legacy data and allows us to connect historic plans to real-world locations, which supports exploration and permitting. You might have noticed on the previous slide, I'll get it back up, that obviously some of our mines and shafts have name. I did choose Ding Dong Mine on purpose, it's one of my favourite names. But these are all sometimes referenced within text. So we're currently also working to extract the names of the shafts and texts, shafts and mines, to add that into our data set. And then the last machine learning model that I'm going to touch on is prospectivity mapping. So we're using a mix of expert geological insight and machine learning models to create maps that highlight areas most likely to contain lithium deposits. So this work is based on a paper by my old boss and our former head of data and innovation, Chris Yeomans, who developed this approach during his PhD for tungsten deposits. So this approach combines geological, geochemical and geophysical datasets. So things like granite lineaments, soil geochemistry, stream sediment geochemistry. We then feed that into machine learning models like random forest to find patterns that match known lithium sources. And this is then displayed on custom-built confidence maps to help us prioritize the best exploration targets. So this, what makes this smart, I guess you could say, using expert knowledge helps us to shape the data before it goes into the model. So we add an element of human understanding. And the machine learning model learns from what we already know, so confirmed lithium locations, and then predicts other places that could be similar. We then use a confidence metric to help us focus on the targets that the model is most sure about. So this is a current piece of ongoing work, so I'm not allowed to go into too much detail on it, but there's a little sample on the right of the sort of maps that we can produce, showing the targeted areas. But yeah, that is a brief overview of the role of data science in our geothermal workflows at Cornish Lithium, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Harriet. That was fabulous. And there's just an insane amount of work that's gone into that and data that you've managed to glean. I'm very, very impressed. That's super cool. Does anybody have any questions? There's no questions in the box yet, but please do turn on your cameras if you want to ask a question as well, and microphones, and try and make this more of a interactive session because there's not that many of us. Okay, no questions coming forward so far, but how long, I think you had the slide that showed the many data points around Cornwall about picking out the different words. How long does that sort of process take to set up?
So the initial training process was sort of the longest thing. So you obviously have to create a data set of it to learn from. So I would be going into the maps, giving examples of, say, mine or shaft, this is what I want you to find, and then running it over. So to actually produce that whole map took, I think it was 2 months in total, which is a lot quicker than it would have taken us to do it manually. I don't actually want to think about how long that would take to do manually. But yeah, it speeds up a lot quicker. But yeah, I think with any machine learning model, the data pre-processing is sort of the longest time consuming bit, but it's worth it in the end.
Oh, absolutely. And it's amazing how it picks up those individual words, because the writing's not even like that clear, really, is it?
Yeah, I mean, it's easier of this than it would be, say, a hand-drawn map. So for the 928 maps, they are at least a similar font because it's been printed, so it can identify that again. But there are some instances where, it might be going over a line or something that's not the best preservation of it, which makes it a bit more tricky. But it does a pretty good job, I'd say, of finding all of these instances. We did actually get one of our GIS technicians to go over a small area and pick out instances of springs, I think. And yeah, he missed a few, but that the model did get. So we'll count that as a win for machine learning.
That's great. And you said your PhD was in core data. So how did you move from core data to this?
Yeah, so my PhD was looking at applying different machine learning algorithms to core data. So I actually worked on carbonate rocks, so like ancient reefs, which are very different to Cornish rocks. You don't get many corals down here. But the techniques that I developed during that have been applicable to the rocks down here. So the models that I used to train to identify the map symbols and also the different types of data types is the same that I used in my PhD to identify fossils within cores. So I already had the experience of using the model. It's just repurposing it for a different purpose. So yeah, they're the same ones that also like I said, they train self-driving cars to identify road signs and people. So which is perhaps slightly more crucial than map symbols, but it's the same thing that does it.
I think map symbols are pretty crucial, especially because you set the wider context really well, and the sort of the big mission of why we're looking for critical minerals in the first place. So I would say it's quite important.
I agree.
Does anyone else have any questions? Okay. In that case, I'd like to let us all thank Harriet for a fantastic talk.
Lucy, I think there are a few in the chat, in the Q&A. Yep.
Oh, mine's blank. Go on then, Simran.
Okay, so thanks, Harriet, for your lovely talk. James has asked, have you modelled the old mines in 3D? If so, how accurate have the old mine drawings been?
So we don't model the old mines themselves. It's more the structures that are associated with the mines that we're interested in. So if we were to be drilling down, we wouldn't want to be sort of drilling anywhere near mine workings because there are all sorts of nasties floating about within the waters around those. So we want to stay as far away from possible. But from the mine plans that we have from back then, they also show some of the structures around. And like I showed, when we build out the 3D model, we can build out the structures to see what they look like. And those have been super accurate. So I think when I first started, they were talking about the holes that they drilled, which were really very accurate to where they thought the structure would be, which I think coming from geological background and perhaps the traditional oil and gas wells, where you have quite not always they're quite so successful, it was very impressive how much they'd managed to, how accurate they were.
Thank you. We have got questions, and so the other one is from Ali Sweeney. So if you are looking at treating the water to make it potable, are you not planning on re-injecting it? Not you personally, but the system.
So I think we're looking at different processes. Right now it is re-injecting, but obviously, like I said, with the climate change and everything, it could be useful to have another possible water source. So it's something we're looking into. But for now, we are just looking at re-injecting. But it's important for us to sort of consider all different aspects from both economical and environmental perspectives. So if there are good benefits to doing it, then we would look into doing it. So like with our hard rock project, we can produce various byproducts that will have some use. So that could be like within construction or glass industries. But there are sort of certain requirements that you have to meet to be able for them to be used. So it's whether that we can do those. We would like to do it if we can, to get the most out of the resources that we have.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I guess with the geothermal water one, it depends on the end use as well, right? So if there's like a direct end use for the potable water, take agri-food or whatever, that's quite a nice tie-up. Kirsty has a question.
Hi, thank you for the great presentation. It was really interesting. I just had a question actually about training the model. So you mentioned that there was a large collection of historical records. I wondered if you used the entire collection of data and how long it took to train the model with that.
Yeah, so we didn't use the entire collection because obviously the idea of it is to train a model to be able to do it for us, so it goes through quickly. So we had a data set that was around 3,000 documents, so that is multiple pages, and within that we have multiple different data types. So that again took a couple of months. Most of that is just going through and finding good examples. You do want good examples of the data to be like, this is what I want, but you do also need some examples that are slightly more difficult and challenging, just so your model isn't particularly biased on just the perfect data set.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. We have another question from James. He says, will there be any issues with radon gas when drilling and extracting?
I don't think so. But that's not actually something I've been asked before. But I don't think so. I think it's obviously something that we would look into before we would drill in there. I think we should be okay. And it's obviously not something that we would want to be going anywhere near, to be honest.
I can help out with this one as well. When we were drilling United Downs and Eden, we had this question a lot, and it's an issue if it's in a contained space, but when you're drilling, you're in an open air environment, and it wasn't deemed an issue. We had a guy with a radon counter come around and manage and make sure. But, any more questions? Hello.
I have hi. Apologies if the question is stupid. I'm not a geologist, but are there commercial tools to do what you're doing, or you have developed everything on your own, like the models and the tools and everything?
Yeah, so they're all sort of so they're models that have been developed based off of other models, is the way of putting it. So with the machine learning models, so like the YOLO one that we use for object detection, that's a really popular model that's used. A sort of general way of thinking of models that we can use, they have sort of a generic section that is good at classifying images, and it's good at classifying certain features within images, so things like lines, shapes, edges, corners, and colours. And as you go further down into the depths of the model, it becomes more specific. And then the second part of the model is a classifier head. So that's a thing that is really specific to what you've trained on. So if it was, say, your self-driving vehicle, that would be the section that says, okay, this is a road sign, this is a person, this is a car. So what we can do is we can take that model that's been trained on that data set, we can remove the classifier head and put our own model that is specific to our own data set. So that would be like our shafts, our engine houses, our springs, and then that makes it so it's a new model, but it's based on an old model. So that's a process called transfer learning, which is really popular in machine learning, and saves a lot of time in the training process as well. And if you are working with data sets that have a small data set, because the more data you have, generally the better your model will be. So if you have a smaller data set, transfer learning is a really good way around that as well, because you've already got a model that is generically good at classifying things. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for the webinar. Very, very informative. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is so clever. It's amazing. Okay. I can't see any more questions in the Q&A or the chat. Anyone else have anything to ask? Great. Okay. Well, thank you again, Harriet. That was absolutely fascinating. And
Well,
I certainly learned a lot.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Thank you all for attending and giving your lunch to our Wednesday, to supporting our Wednesday with Wing webinars. As you can see, they're a fountain of all knowledge. So thank you. I hope you all have a good rest of your day. And thanks again, Harriet.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.